I will now show you how you can divide a big and complex function into multiple functions. Here you have a main function that is quite complex and quite long to understand. But we will try to divide it into multiple smaller functions that are easily understandable. First, we will try to compile and execute the code to see what happens. So we compile and we run. In the terminal, you can see a question. How many columns would you like? I would like 4 of them. And then how many lines would you like? Well, 3. What happens? In the terminal, you can see we have 4x and then a triangle of stars and a kind of rectangle of pound signs. This is exactly what this program is doing. First, it is taking the number of columns into number of columns variable, and then the number of lines. And then we have a first 4 with a printf. So this 4 is printing the line of x. And then we have 2 4s that are printing stars. So these 2 4s are printing a triangle of stars. And then we have also 2 4s that are printing pound signs in a shape of a rectangle. So basically we have here something that prints a line, and the length of the line is the number of columns. Then we have a new line. Then we have something that prints a triangle of stars, and the height of the triangle is the number of lines, and the length, that's it. And then we have this code here that prints a rectangle of pound sign, and this rectangle has a height of the number of lines and a width of a number of columns. Anyway, what we will try to do is to divide this big main function that is quite complex to understand when we just look at it into multiple small functions. Let me show you how it looks like when you have smaller functions. For that, I will copy-paste the version of this program with smaller functions. That's it. And look now at the main function. The main function is much more smaller. Only those lines. Look at that. First we have the question, how many columns? We scanf, then we print line. So we call a function that is called print line. Then we ask how many lines we would like. We scanf the number of lines, and we print triangle. So we call a function that is called print triangle, then a new line, then print rectangle. It's pretty simple to understand the main function now. Why? Because the name of the function that we created and that we call in the main function are expressive, meaning that print line, we can understand what it means. It will print a line. Print triangle, we understand it. It will print a triangle. And print rectangle, well, the same. So the name of the functions are very important so that you can understand afterwards what the program is doing. As you can notice also, at the top of the program here, I have put the prototypes of the function. Print line gets 1 integer, number of columns, and 1 character, the pattern. Print triangle gets 1 integer, the number of lines, and 1 character, the pattern. And print rectangle gets 1 integer, the number of lines, 1 integer, the number of columns, and 1 character, the pattern. The 3 functions don't return anything, void, void, and void, meaning that they will only print something, they will not compute anything, so they don't return a value, they don't return a result. They just print something in the terminal, and that's it. Well, let's compile and execute this program to understand what's happening when we call these functions. So I hit the compile and I will run step by step. So variable, number of columns, number of lines. How many columns would you like? Let's put 4. And then we will call the function printLine with number of columns 4 and the character x. So we get to the function at the bottom, printLine. And the number of columns is 4 and the character, the pattern, is x. And we find here exactly the code that we had in the old main function that will print a line of x. So we execute this 4, that will print a line of x. When we are at the end of the function, we don't have any return, because as I said, this function does not compute anything. So it does not return a value. So we just print the last here new line, and we get out of the function and go back to the main function. So the main function, what it does then, it asks, how many lines would you like? Let's put 3, and the scanf gets the number of lines. And then we have a print triangle, and we call with number of lines and the character star. Let's get into this function, print triangle. And let's pause here just a minute. As you can see in the code of the function print triangle, we call the function printLine. And we already know this function because we just used it to print a line of x. But this time we will use it with the pattern, and the pattern, as a reminder, is a star this time. As you can see here in the variables, pattern is a star because we just received a star for print triangle. So let's execute the code of print triangle. We go into the for loop the first time, and we will call the first print line. So we get into the printLine function, and the printLine will print a line with only 1 star. And then we go back into the print triangle, the second iteration of the for loop, and we will call a second time the print line. But this time, calls will be 1 plus 1, so 2, and we will print a line with a printLine function with 2 stars. And that's exactly what's happening. And then we go back to the print triangle into the third iteration of the for loop, and we will call a third time the print line. But this time calls will be 2 plus 1, so 3. The pattern is still a star. So we will print a line of 3 stars. So we go into the print line and we print 3 stars like this. And then we go back to the print triangle, and I think I'm done with this. Yes. So the print triangle used 3 times the printLine function, which is quite interesting. And then we have print rectangle. So let's get into it with 3 arguments, number of lines, number of columns, and the pound sign. We receive these the values of the arguments into the parameters, number of lines, number of columns, and the pattern. And here, again, we use the printLine function in a for loop. So let's execute it. First time we get into the for loop, first iteration, we will print a line with the pattern. This time it's a pound sign and the number of columns. So the print line will print a line with 4 pound signs. Then we go back to the print rectangle and into the second iteration of the for loop, and we will again call the print line a second time, and we will print a line of pound sign, and then third iteration of the for loop into the print rectangle. So we call a third time the print line, and it will print a third line, and you get the point. That's it. So that's how we used all the function imbricated one into another. In the main function, which is pretty simple here, we use print line, print triangle, and print rectangle. And very interesting, print line uses only printf, so this we know it. But very interesting, print triangle uses multiple times print line, and print rectangle uses multiple times the print line function. And that's how you simplify somehow the main function. It is much more easy to read, as you can see here. And it is much more easy to debug and to maintain a code that has very small functions, so that you can focus more on the errors within a function. As you can see, each function here are only 3, 4, or 5 lines length. So it's very easy to understand and to maintain this kind of code. So that's how you use the function. When you have a complex function, try to divide it into multiple smaller functions. And the benefit of it is that you can reuse one function. For example, print line, I reused it many times because it is useful to print a triangle, and it is useful to print a rectangle. So it's always useful to have very small functions that you can use everywhere else. Now, try to understand by yourself this code and try to modify the number of columns and the number of lines and execute this code step by step so that you are sure that you understand how it works. It's your turn to play with the code now.